everyone, it's Shari Carroll for SimonsStamp.com, and I have a card idea using the WPlus9 Doodle Buds to create a frame around a message. The stamp set has whimsically drawn flowers and stems, and you can use them with the stems, or in my case, I'm going to just be using the buds. I'm also using some Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and I have two sheets, one to stamp all my flowers on and one to create a watercolor wash background. I'm starting off doing my background. I have my paper here and some clean water. Also a paintbrush that is really full and soft. So I've dipped that into the water and I'm just adding it onto the paper, kind of in an area where I want my message and the flowers. And the water helps all the inks really flow onto the paper. The ink I'm using for my background is the Tim Holtz Distress Peacock Feathers, and I've just put that onto a block. I've dipped my paintbrush into some more water, and now I'm just going to tap this onto the water that's sitting on the paper. And with the water down first, it really helps this to spread out and wick around. So I'm not actually painting, I'm just tapping the ink on. You can also tilt the page a little bit or your paper a little bit and get some little drips going on. And as needed, go ahead and dip back into your color and add more for darker areas. If you want to lighten up some areas, just go ahead and add a little bit more water. This helps you get a little bit more variation in the color. You can let this air dry, but I'm going to hit it with my heat gun so that I get a little bit more hard edges around my paint color. And what I mean by hard edges, I'll go ahead and lift this up so you can see it. I have little areas where the ink has pooled and it's left little edges around with a little more concentration of color. I've stamped my blossoms and some leaves onto the watercolor paper, and I've used the Ranger Archival black ink. And I have done 6 flowers. I'll be using the outsides of some of the flowers and using all the leaves, and then some of the centers of the other extra flowers. So I'm going to lay down my ink onto a clear block. This is my preferred method for using my distress inks for watercolor. So I'll start off with Spice Marmalade. I also have the new Candied Apple. I don't know if you can see that really clearly. And I'll just use a corner of the ink pad there since I'm using a larger ink pad. Also, I have picked raspberry and mustard seed. I've chosen these colors because they'll contrast against my background, and also they'll blend really well together. To get these started, I'm adding water to the flower part, and I'm using another soft brush, but this one's quite a bit smaller. So I'm just going around pretty much that whole open area of the flower, just adding a little bit of water. So when I start these off, I'll start with one color, and while it's still wet, I'll start adding in a second color, just to give it a little bit of variation of color. So here I've started with the Spice Marmalade, and I've added a little bit more water, just kind of spreading this out. And while this is still wet, I'm going to go ahead and go into that Candied Apple and start adding a little bit of red, which will give me a little bit darker orange. So I'm just going to keep playing with my inks here, adding a little bit more water as needed so it flows really well, and then adding a little bit more concentrated color where I need it. For the picked raspberry, I'll just be using a single color on this one. So I'm starting off with a really light wash, and then I'm drying my brush a little bit with a paper towel and going back in and grabbing more concentrated color and just tapping that in and around. At this point, my flowers are dry. I've also painted my leaves, and I've used mowed lawn and peeled paint together so that I get 2 different colors of green in my leaves. And I'll go ahead and lift this up so you can see the hard edges and how that peeled paint gives me a little bit more yellow on those leaves, and the mowed lawn gives me a little bit more blue. I'll let my paper dry really well before I go ahead and die cut and cut out my flowers. I've stamped my greeting onto my watercolor wash background, and now I'm just figuring out how I want my flowers to sit around. So I have all my individual leaves, and I can go ahead and tuck those under. I've also used a little bit of dimensional tape to put these together. I've attached everything down, and right now I've created a little bow with some black twine, and I've used some glue dots to kind of fold that over and then go ahead and tuck it under one of the flowers. To finish this up, I've added a few charcoal sequins, and I've also added my panel to a black piece of cardstock and then mounted it onto a top folding white card. I hope I've given you some inspiration using the WPlus9 Doodle Buds stamp set, and as always, thanks for watching.